All right, everyone. Well, we're going to get rolling. So thank you for joining us. The disembodied voice you're hearing is Shane, that's me. And today we're going to be talking about expanding your online presence. So before we get into exactly who we are, or even kind of the bulk of what we'll be talking about today, I wanted to just launch a little poll for everyone. So please take a minute and kind of help us gauge where you all are at. So we'll leave this up for about a minute or so. All right, almost everyone's voted. Give you a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to close this and let's see what we got. So most folks are on social media. A handful have LinkedIn ResearchGate, handful of a personal website, some of a blog, and no one has done a long form writing, something like an op-ed or a letter to the editor. Okay, well, that is good to know. All right, so now to what we're talking about today. So first things first, if you have seen one of these webinars before, apologies, these first few slides are going to be a repeat, but if you haven't and you're unfamiliar with exactly who we are in the Sharing Science program, so Sharing Science is part of the American Geophysical Union. We're a big Earth and Space Science society, a bunch of journals, a bunch of small conferences, usually one real big conference every year, which we are still having virtually this year in December. But within that is the Sharing Science program. And so our goal in this program is to help scientists, help fellow scientists with their communication endeavors. So our unofficial tagline is we are scientists who help other scientists talk to non-scientists. And we do this through a whole slew of different ways. You are on one of these things now. So webinars, especially this year and probably moving forward, are going to be kind of the stalwarts of how we get this message out. But we also do offer workshops, both in person and virtually. We have a ton of online resources. That's what this whole webinar is about. We have a website, a Twitter account, and can provide hopefully outreach opportunities and even some hands-on support if you need it. I mentioned that this is part of a larger series, so some of you have already are aware of this because we have people signing up immediately after after previous webinars. But if you are interested in things like advocacy, so science policy, or writing op-eds or letters to the editors, more of a journalism side, or just prepping for our meeting or any meeting in a virtual landscape, or anything else you see on here, we encourage you to sign up for future webinars. And if you missed our previous webinars, you can find those as well. We have created what we're calling the Virtual Learning Hub. And so in each one of these is not only a link to the past webinar, but we put all of this content around the webinar, highlighting different pieces and components and take homes and all sorts of different things. So there's videos of me and my dog on TikTok talking about science communication. My colleague Olivia has drawn these amazing drawings about certain elements, and we've animated them and done voiceovers. We even have some infographics. So we'll follow up after this after this webinar with a whole bunch of information, but a link to this this virtual learning hub with previous webinars will be available as well. Okay, so a bit about me. Like I said, my name is Shane. I'm one of the two core staff here in the Sharing Science program. I'm a biologist by training, an ecologist. I loved that world, but I was kind of I just didn't know what happened to science and happened to research outside of academia. So I went from being this guy, a Mudaboots ecologist, to a suit on Capitol Hill doing science policy, which I also enjoyed. But I really found my calling in sharing science kind of being the doing a little bit of everything, being able to do a little bit of research here and there, but more be able to educate and communicate and train and touch on the policy and still be involved in the sciences. And so that's kind of informed where I'm at now. And I will kick it over to Olivia to let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Shane. Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia Ambrogio. Also a biologist by training. That's not a requirement for sharing science, it's just how it turned out. I got my PhD studying the sex lives of marine snails, which are incredibly fascinating, in case you're wondering. But ended up being really interested in communication as well, and through a rather circuitous route, ended up in SciComm, helping AGU develop and now expand the sharing science program.
Thanks, Olivia. And we do have a special guest, Tracy, who we will let her introduce herself later when she's talking about her section on making a great personal website. One last thing before we move forward. So there were I'm seeing some things in the chat box and the question box about the previous poll. I realized that once I put that up that it should have been select multiple ones and not necessarily just select one. So I will own that. That is my fault. I will keep that in mind kind of moving forward. Okay, so what you're actually here today to learn about. First question is, why have an online presence in the first place? And what exactly do we mean by this question, like this thing like online presence? What does this terminology mean? Well, to me and to us, it's basically any ways that you are online in any capacity. So if someone were to Google you, what would show up? And for me personally, this means a whole bunch of different things. So this is my professional profile at AGU. I have a personal website that I'm ashamed to say is not super great and I should be keeping it up more. This is my LinkedIn profile or my ResearchGate profile that lists who I am and what I've done, what I'm interested in. Especially these days, it's my Twitter and even different pieces that I've written for different outlets, whether that's blogs at AGU or our news magazine or even just other popular science pieces. And many of these things seem like kind of more general science communication outreach things, and they are. That's the world in which I live. But something I want to stress up front before we even get into a lot of this is that online presence doesn't have to be science communication and outreach, or excuse me, it doesn't have to be outreach. Science communication doesn't necessarily mean outreach to a non-science public. We encourage you to do that. This is what we do for a living, is to train these skills, but online presence can just be a repository of your research, of what you're interested in professionally, of what you are doing in your field. So this is so much broader than just something like social media, and that's why we have this term, online presence. So now that we have hopefully kind of an idea of what we mean by this really broad term, the next question that we get asked, and you might be asking yourself, is, well, why really have this kind of broader online presence? There's a whole slew of different reasons. Some of you may have even seen this illustration before. We use it a lot because it's really applicable, especially when thinking about why you should be active online. There are just so many reasons. There are general things like I just want to share my science, or maybe you want to get feedback on research. Maybe you just want to boost your own personal profile, and that's completely okay. We'll talk about promotion later. There could be more research reasons, like you want to get research updates, or maybe attract people to your lab or your research group or whatever it is. Maybe you want to develop a public voice or humanize science or engage in advocacy. There are so many reasons that you should be communicating, and especially communicating online, because it has some of the lowest barriers to entry. Another really important thing about engaging full stop, but especially online, is increasing representation. As you saw by my picture, I am a white male, but I am not the face of science. I am one of many faces of science. And so it is so very important that we get out there to show people that not all science looks like me. A majority of science doesn't look like me. There are so many different people out there who are so different in so many different ways, who are doing really, really great work. And so by showcasing who these folks are, who many of you are, online, that's one of the easiest ways to do it and one of the most effective as well. And I'm not just saying this because it's the right thing, because it is, but there is science backing up why it's important to increase representation in the sciences. So what this is showing here is you can see on your left, this is a survey that was done during the Obama presidency and right after, basically asking how people feel about climate change. And if you ask folks, regardless whether they are African American or white, whether they think that climate change is a problem, pre-Obama, they genuinely agree that yes, it's a problem. But during the Obama presidency, the number of white folks who were surveyed, they decreased in how much they thought that it was a serious problem. And the only thing that was different, or excuse me, let me say the biggest thing that was different is that we had an African American president. And so this doesn't, like I said, it's not just the right thing to do, it certainly is, but we actually see that there is a consequence in how people perceive science and scientists. And on the right, this is just kind of a more generalized view of this, but the same idea. As racial resentment increases, the folks' willingness to accept human-caused climate change decreases. And so there are scientific reasons backing this up as well. So just some things to keep in mind. But finally, when thinking about why have an online presence and what exactly is it and how broad or narrow should you make it, it's really important to think about what you want to get out of this. Because I threw up that image before that had all these different reasons to do this, but these are all goals in many different ways. Do you want to increase your own citations? Because you will, especially with social media. We found that on Twitter that folks who are very active on Twitter actually have an increase in their scientific citations. Do you want to increase your visibility, get collaborators? I've known folks who have met people online, only online, have had research papers come out of it. Do you want to have a place for your science or get media opportunities, people interested in your science, which Tracy will talk about later? Do you have a lab? Do you want to increase your engagement? All sorts of different things. So when communicating, no matter what, think about what your goals are, but especially think about that when you're communicating online, because it is such a great place with so many different opportunities, but you want to make sure that you're not overextending yourself essentially, and that you're getting the most out of this that you can. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to hand it over to Olivia in a second, but before I do that, I want to launch one more poll, and this one is a scale, so no problems like the previous one. Really general, I understand that, but how prepared do you feel to engage with audiences via multiple online platforms? Again, really broad, but answer this to the best of your abilities, and I'll leave it open for about a minute, and we'll keep moving after that. All right, most folks have voted. I'll leave it up for a few more seconds. All right, I'm gonna close this. And what do we got? All right, nice bell curve. So somewhere in the middle, about 47% of you are in that kind of mid-range, feel like you're prepared to engage in multiple platforms. Well, I know that this is only, I guess now like a half an hour, but hopefully we can see these numbers go up a little bit by the time that we're done. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking myself and hand it over to Olivia.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the details of some of the ways in which you can have an online presence and some tips for addressing this and these logistics. So first, just a reminder, there are so many outlets, as we've been talking about, that relate to having an online presence. And some of these are more in what we'd call the social media realm, and some of them are not. And this, what we have here, these little app logos, are just a small portion of the number of things out there that you can explore and that we encourage you to. And one aspect of that, of course, is related to professional networking that you can be doing online as well as in person. Probably more so online right now than in person, given the restrictions that we currently have. So some of these, LinkedIn, ResearchGate, Google Scholar, these are pretty, not exclusive, but pretty, their focus is primarily on sharing your research or job experience or other sort of specifically career-related information and skills with others. Some, like Twitter, and also our AGU Connect online communities that you can talk with others with and share resources with, including the Sharing Science one, but there are many others as well. Those are not exclusively networking related, but many people do use them in that way. And so that's something to think about as well, is that you can, if your interest is pretty much just on professional networking, these are easy ways to sort of engage in that online. And why? Well, any number of reasons. I mean, the same reasons that we do networking in person as well. To connect with others, to maybe develop new collaborations, to let employers know about you or find out about employers, share your work history and publications. You can also host content that you've been involved in. But again, when you have this presence online and people can Google you and or otherwise find out about you, it just makes it one step faster for those you want to engage with and network with to find you and know about you. So another way to expand your online presence is through blogging and other sorts of long form writing. For blogging and other writing, there are a lot of different platforms again, and this is not a comprehensive list, but for blogging sites, you can use Tumblr, there's Blogspot, Wix, Medium, WordPress, lots of different places. There are also places where you can pitch long form writing that will have information and writing from a lot of different sources and where you can communicate to a wide audience. So to start with blogging, if you want to develop a blog, if you have not yet, it's really good, as Shane was already talking about, to think very clearly about what goals you have for it. What do you want to do or communicate or achieve that you think the blog is going to help you achieve? And having a specific theme and set of goals is really, really valuable, not just because it helps you measure whether or not you're successful, but because it will make it more compelling for others if they feel that there's something thematic about what you do. So again, you want to think about, what do you have to say about whatever theme this is? What is your voice going to be like? You want to have your own voice to make it interesting, but you want to think about how much humor you're using depending on what audience you're researching for. And are you going to use sarcasm or satire? Is it going to be off-putting, or are people going to misunderstand you? Just things to think about. And then two, who's contributing? Is this going to be you? Are you going to be producing all of the content yourself? Are you going to work with a sort of group of collaborators who are going to develop this together? Or are you going to be regularly soliciting guest posts and just more of the curator of this content? And then before you start, you also want to think about, does this blog already exist? And if so, is it wildly popular? And do you think that another one in a similar theme would also garner a lot of attention? Or has it pretty much been done? Do you think there's an audience for the kind of content that you're producing? Can you find out in advance? And can you try out doing guest posts somewhere else and someone else's site to start with, to see how much time and energy it really takes you and whether you want to commit to this? When you're doing blogging, as with almost everything online, it's really great to use visuals if you can. You'll have a much higher click-through rate if you're promoting your information. If you use visuals, people will stay on your blog longer if you're using visuals. You'll want some sort of featured image sort of to share when you're promoting whatever blog post it is, and you'll also want more images within the post itself. And then something else to be aware of is that it's really okay to end your blog too. If it's taking up too much of your time and energy and you're not feeling that you're getting enough back, or if it has been successful for a while, but now it's just not achieving the same things for you, or if you feel that you can do the same thing better using another medium, it's really okay to end it. You don't have to delete the blog. You can keep that content up there archived for others to refer to, or that you can link back to at various points. But you don't have to, once you've done it, be committed forever. It's really okay. Now, other online outlets that are long form include writing op-eds or letters to the editor for newspapers and other news sources. These are not exclusively online, obviously, but most papers these days tend to publish a lot of them online as well, so that those are searchable under your name, and that is another way of expanding your online presence as well as your presence generally. You can make guest contributions to other blogs. You may be solicited by various organizations or sites asking if you'd be willing to write something about a particular topic. And you can also pitch ideas that you have to sites like EOS, our AGU News, or Science or Nature or others. So it doesn't always have to be research. If you have ideas or opinions that you feel are valuable to share, you can also pitch those as long form writing. Obviously, another major element of an online presence is social media, as in all the other social media. And I won't go into this in detail because we just did a full webinar on this last month, which you can access through that virtual learning hub that Shane was talking about in the Sharing Science AGU Connect community. In there, you can see the whole thing or have links to it, or see these various animations that I've done that Shane's narrated that give you sort of a 8 to 10 minute summary of what we were talking about within it, if you don't feel you have time to go through the whole thing. But I do want to emphasize too, I won't go over what we've already done then, but when you think about science online, and this is for everything, but it's also for social media, again, you want to think about who you want your audience to be. People within your field, people outside of it, how far outside of it. Why do you want to do this? Are you creating new content because you feel it's lacking? Are you interested in creating or finding community? Or do you feel there's a lot out there that just needs to be curated and brought together in some way, and you could do that? And then how much time are you willing to expend, from the minimal to, I love this flow chart, the life-sucking yet strangely satisfying time involved in things like blogging. And one other thing that I want to say about time, we do have a whole one-pager that I believe is among the attachments that we've shared for this webinar about social media and time commitments. But I just want to mention that scheduling software, things like TweetDeck for Twitter or Hootsuite for a lot of platforms, can let you schedule posts in advance. Same with lots of blogging sites. So if you only have time on certain days, you can still have a presence out there more regularly, more frequently, without having to commit to that everyday practice necessarily. And you can also give it a test run. There are lots of what are called Twitter roker sites that will let you take over the account for a day or a week. You can write guest blog posts. You can do things like take over our Instagram account. You can try out things like Skype a Scientist, which allows you to do video interactions with others, sometimes student groups or family groups or even adults, but in a sort of a one-off nature, so you don't have to commit long-term. So those are also things that I really encourage you to try out if you haven't already developed that aspect of your online presence, to see what speaks to you and what you're most interested in being involved with and which audiences you feel most galvanized by. And of course, also a great way to establish an online presence is to have a personal website. There are lots of different software out there, and platforms out there that will let you develop a website. Some of them are free, some of them you have to pay money for, or you have to pay money for the pro version. So I encourage you to explore those yourself. But there are lots of different options if you're thinking about developing a website. But that's all I will say about that, because now I am going to let our special guest, Dr. Tracy Becker, a wonderful person, a Voices for Science advocate from our inaugural year, take over and talk more about why and how to have a website.
Thanks, Olivia, and thanks, Shane, for having me here today. I'm excited to talk to you all about my website. First and foremost, I'll say go ahead and check it out if you'd like. While we're talking, I'm going to kind of walk through some of it during this presentation. But yeah, quickly, so I'm Tracy Becker. I'm a research scientist, group lead of research and development at Southwest Research Institute. I'm post PhD 4 years and pronouns she, her, and you can follow me on Twitter as well. And I'm going to see if I can click forward. Doesn't seem to be working yet. I might have to ask others to click for me.
I can click for you, Tracy.
Okay. So go ahead to the next slide. I'm not seeing it change. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So this is just a screen grab of my my website that I have. I've only had a website for about a year. One thing that Olivia mentioned is you do want to keep it up to date if you're going to have a website. You definitely don't want to have a very outdated one. So just keep that in mind if you're getting involved. But honestly, I think the majority of work was kind of at the very beginning, and then you're kind of set to go with little edits here and there, and it's really not so bad. Can you go ahead and click? I'm not seeing it change. It might just be slow. There we go. Okay. So we talked a lot about this being a way to establish yourself as in your career. I consider my career to be kind of two major parts: my research and my outreach. I do a lot of outreach and education for kids, but also for adults. And that sort of ended up giving me a little bit of a media presence. So I'm not talking necessarily about social media, but just being able to communicate my science in a broader fashion, which is kind of what's exciting. And what's cool about it is that the website is actually what enabled a lot of that. And that's what I'm kind of here to talk about. So we go to the next slide. First, I'll talk a little bit about my research itself. So I'm a planetary scientist at SWIRI, and I'm part of NASA's Europa Clipper mission. I'm the composition working group co-chair for that mission right now. I study Saturn's rings using Cassini data, and I study radar images of asteroids using the Arecibo Observatory, and I'm actually a science communicator for the observatory, so check out any of their newsletters. I actually am the one that writes them. Another shameless plug, but okay, and the next slide. And the research was really my initial reason for why I created a website, but I want to talk to you instead about in practice what has happened because of that. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Just like, it seems like you're cutting in and out once in a while with your voice.
Sorry. I'll try to speak much closer to the computer. So in practice, having a website has actually been beneficial for my ability to do science communication. And without bearing the lead, I'll just say that because of my website, I was invited to be on Science Friday, which is hosted on NPR with Ira Flatow, if any of you have heard of it, to discuss NASA missions. And I was so overjoyed and excited. And if you don't know Ira Flatow, he's been doing science radio, the Science Friday program for a long time and talking about science in our world. And it's a national program, so you can actually listen to it if you want. If you go to my website, I have a link to it. And this is really exciting. And the reason that this happened was because my science communication person at my institute saw that I have my website in my tagline of my email, and she clicked on that. And in the background, I didn't even know any of this was happening, but NPR was coming. They were already, or Science Friday was coming to Texas, to San Antonio. They were already planning to interview Scott Bolton, who is one of the people in that picture there. He's the PI, the lead of the NASA mission to Jupiter, called Juno. And so, of course, he was a natural shoe-in for coming in and talking on the radio. But they were kind of looking for a different voice, maybe an earlier career person, maybe a woman, maybe someone that wasn't a white old guy. With no offense to any white old guys, but just sort of getting another voice out there. And so this person in the science communications department at my institute clicked on my website, said, hey, this is kind of interesting stuff. Maybe they'd be interested. Sent it to Science Friday. They looked at it, thought it was interesting, called me, and then did an interview with me to see if I would be an appropriate candidate for their show. And so all of that really happened in the background without me even realizing that all these people were checking out my website. And I like to think that the way I present my website was also a big part of why they went ahead and gave me a call. I know other things have happened too in the background, like being asked to be interviewed for small science articles, like in Quantum Magazine. So these requests came through my my website itself has a place where you can just kind of send me a question linked to my Gmail. So it actually came through that way. And so I know some other people have found me, again, explicitly through my website. So these are kinds of the opportunities to communicate science. If that's one of your goals within your career, this is a really nice way that you can actually facilitate that. So actually now I think I can see your mouse on there. So go ahead and hit the slide. Yep. So in theory though, so that was in practice, some things that have definitely developed as a result. But in theory, the real main reason I had a website was for my research and for my career. I wanted to have control over what people could see, but mostly I just wanted an opportunity for colleagues and other scientists to see what research I'm doing in case they were interested in it. So in my case, my institution did not have a very good public-facing website, so they could not see me if they wanted to learn what research I was doing. They had no way to see any of that information, and I wanted to share that easily with people. So different reasons why you might want to do that. Honestly, maybe you just gave an awesome AGU presentation and people want to look you up and see, oh, what else does this person work on? Or how do I contact this person afterwards? I remembered their name, but I didn't write down their email on their slide and things like that. This might be a way that they can check that out. Review panels, I think, are really important. I don't know if any of you have been on an NSF review panel or a NASA review panel, but sometimes even as a panel chair, which I've been, I'd like to know which people who should I invite to be on the panel, and what proposals do I assign them so that they can be the best reviewers. And one of the ways I was doing that, honestly, was looking at people's websites, looking at their Twitter feeds, things like that to know. On the flip side, people who might be reviewing your paper might be interested to see what else, what other expertise you have, or what's kind of the type of expertise you have. And they might be looking you up that way. I think this leads to new collaborations as well. I have a list of publications with links, as well as scattered throughout the text. I have links to my publications, and I have a full tab for my CV, both a one-page CV and a long, full CV. I personally still include fun photos, you can see in this slide, but that's not required. Some people are a little bit more kind of just research only, a little bit less, colorful, whatever sort of your preference. But I kind of liked the dark background with some fun personalized pictures of me doing the research that I do. This was my main focus of this website, was to build a research tab, but I had other tabs as well. So if you go ahead to the next slide, I have an outreach tab. So I did say in the beginning, I do enjoy doing a lot of outreach. And so this is a nice way to promote and also just record my outreach communication activities. And I could just kind of send it to my boss if they were like, hey, what have you been working on outside of work? And it's like, here you go, look at all the stuff I've done for the community. You can see my AGU Voices for Science. I have a link up there so people can check it out if they're interested in it. I started the Astronomy on Tap with a colleague here in San Antonio. And, we promoted that event. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But so this is just a nice place so people can kind of see all the outreach that I've been doing. Next slide. And I do have a media tab now. So this wasn't an initial tab that I had, but once I started kind of having some other cool experiences like this, where I've been on PBS Nova to talk about Saturn, Science Friday, again, to talk about NASA missions, and then just some friends and other colleagues' podcasts. I put that all in one tab now, and that's kind of a nice promotion for my friends' podcasts, but also good ways for other people who maybe want to contact me for future science communication opportunities to see how well I've done in the past and see if I'm kind of the right fit the way I talk or what I talk about. for whatever it is that they're looking for. So next tab, next slide, which does include more tabs. I think there are a lot of other tabs out there. So I've listed a few that I've seen on other people's websites, including my own. I promote our research group within the Planetary Sciences group. I lead the Remote Sensing Observers group. And so this actually has links to my colleagues at SWIRI, their websites as well. But I'd love to invite everyone to use the chat box or maybe the question box, whatever is easier, to share some other ideas for what you would do with your website. What other things might you include? I have a friend who, Natalie Hinkle, I'll talk about her in the next slide, but she has a whole page set up for like kind of those basic Q&As of future scientists. So where they ask you kind of all those questions like, you know, what inspired you to be a scientist? What do you, what's the job like? What do you do on a day-to-day? She has a whole site that she can guide them to as a first crack at like getting those answers. And then if they have additional questions, she's happy to write out an email and all of that. But to write the same email 1,000 times, she just has a really pretty website that she can point all of these people to. So I think that's great. Yeah, so I don't know if people are sharing other ideas. I think that's great. Oh, I see people are saying my sound is poor. I'm sorry. I don't know why. I'm usually fine. Okay, next slide. This is my last one. So what we did was had a website building day. We pre-selected a bunch of images related to research, outreach, whatever we wanted to put on the website, and we all got together and just spent 5 hours building a website with a bunch of other scientists and engineers. We had one scientist who had a really good website, explain to us what she did and how she got started, and basically did what you guys just had already through Shane and Olivia. So you guys kind of already have that. She talks about best practices, costs, maintenances, like keeping it up to date. Honestly, by the end of that 5 hours, we had a decent presentation, a decent website already set. I would say my website, I own my domain name, so there was a little bit of a cost there. And then to use Weebly can be free, but I did a little bit of an upgraded package. So I spend maybe $30 a year total on my website. But you don't have to do that. It can certainly be free if you want it to be. So I think that's it for me. Sorry, my sound didn't come in very clearly.
Oh, no worries, Tracy, and thank you very much. Yeah, there was a couple parts that it cut a little bit, but for the most part, I think folks got it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so I will actually pause this. So with that, just to kind of wrap up this section, so what you're seeing here is part of these animations we were talking about before, but to this question of what is online presence, well, it's so many things, right? We've just covered a very few of them in a very short period of time, but there's so much out there. And some of the great things to really focus on are things like networking. So whether that's ResearchGate or LinkedIn or even Twitter or something like that, there's kind of this more long form writing, things like blogging and guest posts on blogs if you don't want to create your own blogs, writing op-eds and LTEs, which there's a question in the chat that we'll talk about in a little bit about opportunities to do that as well. Maybe you'll have a solicitation. Maybe someone will ask you to write something as well. Or even there's places you can do pitches like The Conversation or our news magazine, EOS. So again, not a comprehensive list, but so many different options out there. There's also things like social media. So what we consider kind of everything else in the world, which we have a webinar we just did on. And finally, to Tracy's point, websites. Like I said, I personally have a website that has not been updated in quite some time, and maybe this will be the oomph I need to update it. But you could see and hear from Tracy that having a personal website is not just great professionally, but can be good for outreach and media presence and all sorts of different things. And I will say that these are all the different options out there. You can be on all of these things and do all of these things, or maybe just do a few of them. It's whatever works best for you. So that's kind of the broad swath of things out there in the world. Kind of one last thing before we kind of wrap up and go into Q&A is, so you have all these things, how do people find out about them? And that gets us to promotion. And the first, and I guess really only question is it okay to self-promote? And the answer is assuredly yes. I feel like we are programmed as people, and especially as scientists, not to talk about ourselves in the positive, not to self-promote, not to be overly effusive about ourselves, but self-promotion is okay. There's a reason you have all of these things, because you want to talk about your successes. There's nothing wrong with promoting yourself. But how? There are a slew of different ways to do this. And for this, we'll quickly kick it back over to Tracy before we show you some AGU examples.
Yeah, so I would say, and as sort of an earlier career scientist still too, I know that sometimes feeling like promoting yourself is a little bit awkward. And I think everyone has a personal and cultural limitation to how much they want to promote, but I think you should always kind of edge yourself just slightly out of your comfort zone and be very okay with promoting yourself. I always include my website, my Twitter handle, on my outreach slide. So if I'm doing outreach or giving a public talk, it's always there. And also, I've had some cool experiences that I just wanted to share with you all, where I did an Astronomy on Tap event where we hosted Eileen Collins. She's front and center in that picture. She's an astronaut. That was awesome. AGU actually helped support that event. And we reached out to like a local Instagram that had a ton of followers, like a San Antonio, what's good in San Antonio type Instagram account. And they asked people to share or retweet, for example, their posts, and they were going to randomly pick 2 people who had shared the post to get free tickets. And the tickets were like $10. In the meantime, to give out 2 free tickets, we got so much free press because everyone kept sharing it, and it reached an audience that never would have seen just my Facebook promotions for the event that we have. So there's a lot of ways. I'm just kind of suggesting one. So stay creative and reach out to some of these kind of bigger accounts. They might be willing to share your event or share your news that you have about your recent publication, things like that.
Thanks, Tracy. And just some examples that we have from AGU and some other things to think about. So you might not be thinking like, okay, I'm out there, but maybe I don't have anything interesting to say. And that's not necessarily true. It could be things like where you work and what it's like, how you came into the sciences or to wherever you are right now. If you have visuals or sounds or like if you can show living things or whatever it might be, things that will grab people's attention. These are ways that you can not only get their attention, but also self-promote and talk about the obstacles that you face in your process. Like, these are all ways that people will be engaged in what you're talking about. Show your personality. Again, if you've been in some of these webinars before, maybe you've seen some of these, but they're such great examples. Like, these are this is Kim Cobb and this Dress Like a Woman account that was basically showing like badass women going against these stereotypes and with this hydraulic drill doing her field work. Dawn Wright showing off her personality and how much she loves Legos. Both are incredible scientists. These quirky details, these are ones that we've done from our account, but this is our colleague Nancy in one of the suits that you have to get into for like if you're going out on a cruise, like a research cruise, one of the safety suits, or just what goes into packing for an expedition. And so these are ways, like these are the things that will grab people's attention to talk about the cool things that you're doing. We've seen some of Olivia's drawings, but if you are an artist, or if you shoot video, or you do, say, podcasting or audio or whatever it might be, you can use those skills to pull people into what you're doing, to promote what you're doing, and also people are going to like it. So self-promotion isn't bad, especially when what you're promoting is something that people will genuinely be interested in. Because you can self-promote all you want, but if people aren't interested in it, then it's not really going to matter. But if they are interested in it, then it doesn't really seem like self-promotion. So drawings, cartoons are a really great way to do that if you can. And again, this is effective social media, but this is for this, but kind of more broadly, frankly, for engagement. But just think about these types of things. just to recap, things like tone and hashtags. Again, multimedia can be really great. How often you're posting, or how up to date your website is, or how up to date your LinkedIn page is, or these things to keep in mind to make sure that your online presence is its most current. And are you using this online presence to engage in dialogue? If you're on Twitter, something like maybe retweets or Facebook shares, or actually who's sharing or replying to or engaging with your content. All sorts of things to think about, not only for social media, but kind of the larger online process or presence. So just to recap, when thinking about whether you should promote yourself and promote your online process, the short answer is yes. It's okay. Everyone does it. It's not a bad thing to do. We thoroughly encourage it. Think about, though, what's the best outlet for what you're doing? Are they visuals or videos? Is it chat? Is it audio? There are all sorts of different mediums out there. So there's going to be different ways you can talk about your work and do that promotion. And then also, one thing to do is maybe learn from folks who are out there doing it well. There are people who are probably out there promoting themselves that you don't even quite realize that that's what they're doing, because they're just sharing their work. And that is completely fine. It doesn't necessarily have to be a conscious, this is self-promotion. It can just be you're out there sharing what you do. And that's really great, because you are interested in this, and you might get others interested in that, in this as well. And so kind of before we think about what's next, I just have one more poll for you all, and I would appreciate you all taking. So this is our kind of gut check. I gave this to you before. Please take a minute and answer this again, just to kind of gauge where everyone's at. And then I will hand it over to Olivia to talk about what's next. And we'll get into Q&A as well. All right, seems like things are starting to level off. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, so, and this is what we love to see. So things have shifted a little bit. The majority of last time in the beginning was 3, now we're up to 4. And again, we recognize that the 49 minutes we've been together is not enough time to do all of this, but lucky for you all, this is not over. And Olivia will talk about what's next.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, so certainly, as Shane was saying, this is not the end. This is only the beginning of your journey with us, we hope. So if you've enjoyed this webinar, please do explore the rest of this year's series, which you can register for at webinars.agu.org right now, and be aware there will be another series next year with some new material, because we want to keep offering these resources to you. And definitely, if you're interested in looking more at what's going on in social media, please follow our accounts for AGU, for AGU Sharing Science, and if you want to, any of our the personal accounts of those of us who've been conducting this webinar. And if you're interested in science communication more broadly, I encourage you to check out AGU's podcast, Third Pod from the Sun, which is hosted by Shane and our colleague Nancy, who make a quite hilarious pair. This is really interviews with scientists who are talking about other elements of science and the sort of stories behind it and the experiences they're having. And it's a great way to see how you can humanize science and share parts of your research that you may not have thought people wanted to know about, but that they really do. And then, of course, please join the Sharing Science community. You can sign up online. This is the link. And then you become, have access to our whole AGU Connect site for the Sharing Science community, which offers a wide variety of things. It offers a platform for you to communicate with others who are also interested in science communication, but within the sciences. So you know it's not you alone. We have all of our toolkits and other resources. Shane has created a huge library of social science research around science communication that you have access to. Again, there's the virtual learning hub that you can get to that has all of these additional products that we've created around the webinars. So there's just a lot there that I really recommend you join to have access to. And again, check out our website generally for a lot of these toolkits and guidelines that we try to create on a wide variety of topics around communication. And with that, we're going to take some questions. And if you have already put a question in the chat box, we'll get to those. And feel free to put in a question now if you haven't yet, and we'll try to cover as many as we can during the time we have remaining.
Yeah, so I'll start with some quick and easy ones. Will the recording of the webinar be shared? Yes, it will be. We will follow up with all of you with an email, probably in a week or so, with a recording and all of those extra products. But we'll also be sharing it via our Twitter and Facebook and the general accounts. So yes. What are the opportunities to write op-eds? Oh, so we will be having a webinar on that moving forward. This is us. Hi, Tracy's camera's not working. But we will be having a webinar on that coming up. I think it's in the next few, but also we will add a link in this follow-up email because we do have online resources for webinars and letters to the editor. And we actually have a toolkit, which I do not know. I did. It's one of the PDFs that I included in your handouts. So there's a handout section on your little dashboard. There's also resources there as well. Okay. Can you give details about the apps and which apps are the symbols? Oh, okay. So which basically we put up symbols for social media and websites and different things that were just the symbols and not the actual like Weebly and Wix and all of those things. Yes, that's another thing that we can follow up with because there's so many of them. That's why we just put the symbols up. But we can come up with and this would be good for us to come up with a comprehensive list of what all of these different things are. So Tracy, I'll kick this one to you. So where and how often do you plug and advertise your, this is website, Twitter, social media, et cetera, but kind of how do you work with your frequency and where you're promoting your website or just your online presence in general?
Yeah, so I do, certainly before the pandemic, I did a lot of outreach where I was going to schools or going to do astronomy on tap, for example. And so I always sort of listed on the slides at the beginning and the end all of my contact information, places I wanted people to see me. Professionally, I do keep it in the tagline of my email, my signature. So every email I send out has a link to my website. And I also put it on my business cards, places like that. So just different ways. And again, it depends on the audience that you're trying to reach. So professionally, it's my website. And then in more of a sort of outreach social way, it's a little bit my website, but also some more fun ways like Twitter and things like that for me.
Great, thanks. Another question we have, and this is, Olivia, maybe you can answer this, I can answer this, or maybe even Tracy, but do you think best practices differ between how to expand your online presence when it's for an organization versus yourself? And kind of how does that dynamic work?
Sure. I mean, in a lot of ways, they are going to be similar, right? You need to be present. You need to know who your audience is that you're trying to reach and how you're going to reach them and how else they are interested in being engaged. You want to make sure that you're doing this frequently. You want to make sure that you've really established your goals in advance and are figuring out ways to measure whether or not you're succeeding in them. That said, you know, every organization is going to have different policies, both about things like voice and what sort of professional persona the organization itself is having, and also things like how you're engaging with the audience that you have. So especially on social media, are you responding to comments that you get? How are you responding? Do you have one person who responds versus many? So in a lot of ways, you can be a lot more let's say agile if it's your own personal account, because you can make your own decisions just for you about what kind of voice you want to have all the time, who's responding to things. Well, you know who that is, it's you, you know, and how you're responding. So I'd say that in most respects, it's just for organizations, it's a question of coordinating the same ideas and best practices with a larger group and getting that agreement. That's at least the way I see it. I don't know, Shane or Tracy, if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I don't know if Tracy, you have any thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think I do think it's easier to promote when it's an organization because you feel a little bit less self-conscious about it. So there's that, and you know, I've certainly done like paid avenues for promotion of Astronomy on Tap and those kinds of events, whereas I've probably, well, then again, I pay for my own website, so it kind of just depends on what level you're trying to reach people at and how you want to do it. But I think, yeah, I think self-promotion, it can be a little bit different. You can kind of pick and choose different techniques depending on, again, like Olivia said, the audience you're trying to reach and how you're trying to reach them.
Thank you. There's another one actually to your point, Tracy, about paid websites. And I know that you addressed this briefly in your section, but are these website platforms like Weebly free? So a lot of these websites do have a free version in some way, shape, or form. I know Weebly, Wix, not Squarespace, WordPress. So a bunch of them do have free versions that you can create pretty decent websites for. You can also pay for a really fancy website. One of the most common things that people want is their custom URL. So for me, I have the URL shaneamhamlin.com to a, like I said, a not so great website anymore. But one way to do this really on the cheap is that you can create a free website, something on Weebly or Wix or whatever it might be, and then just buy the domain name. So that's what I did. I created my own WordPress and bought shaneamhamlin.com, and I paid $10 a year for that, and it just redirects. So I can take, and the nice thing with that is when I hopefully someday get a better website at a different domain, I can just change where that redirect is. So that's a really good way to do this in a cost-effective way, while also still having that personalization that I and many other people want. We have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to ask. So I am not this, but I want to ask this because I think this is really important. What advice could you give to introverts on boosting their online presence? I'm an extrovert. I am happy to answer this, but I can kick it to Olivia or Tracy. I don't want to make any assumptions about personality, but I think this is really important to talk about.
Well, you don't have to make an assumption with me, Shane. You know I'm an introvert, so I'm fine to start that. I mean, you know, again, I think it depends on what you're online for, right? And whom you're trying to reach. So if you're an introvert and you don't want to be constantly interacting with people online, but you're online because you either want to do science communication around your science that you think is so cool to some group of people, or because you're trying to develop collaborators, there are ways to do that that can be sort of, I don't know if I want to say lower risk, lower energy, less exhausting. In some ways, I think, you know, networking online can be a lot easier, right? Because you don't have to do the same level of small talk. I personally hate small talk. And you don't really have to do that online. If you're looking at other people's social media, let's say, and you want to network with them, they're talking about actual topics. You find one that you like. I also am really interested in the fact that, you know, horseshoe crabs have copper-based blood. Let's talk about that for a while, you know, or whatever it is. So I think in some ways it's maybe easier to find your people, as it were, with whom you can have less involved interactions in the online sphere.
Great, thank you so much, Olivia. So that's actually, we're at 3 o'clock. I want to be respectful of folks' time. And so we did have more questions that we did not get to. What we will do is we'll sort through these. And like I said, we will follow up with everyone in a follow-up email, hopefully in the next week or two. But we'll go through these and answer the ones that we can. And we followed up individually with some of you as well. But that's all of our time together. So thank you for all of you for coming today. Please check out our webinar in the future. And thank you, Tracy, who unfortunately cannot see, but for being a great guest speaker today. Tracy, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And hopefully we will see you again.